Welcome to part 9 of Angular from Scratch video series, and in this video we'll be talking about services. Services in Angular are used as data providers. For example, an Angular service can get some data from the server and inject it into a component. A service has some methods defined to call a server and get data. We can then call these methods from our components classes and then pass this data on to our components template files. Thanks to the two-way data binding, we can easily update the data model from our template files too. Let's add a service to our example app so that we see how it works. We'll run the following code in our console. Well, actually, I first need to have a console available, so let me do a plus here, which will open another bash or terminal window, and let's type ng generate service some data. Similar to what we've seen for generating components, we can use shorthand syntax here as well, which would simply be ng generate as g, then s for service, and some data. Once I run this command by pressing the enter key, the app will be updated as follows. An src app some data service ts file will be added, which is the one right here, and src app some data service spec ts file will be added. We can ignore the spec file because that's intended for testing our application and we won't cover that just yet. Let's inspect the contents of some data service ts. Similar to add component and add ng module, the add injectable right here is a decorator. This decorator only shows the provided in property inside the object literal we pass to it. It also exports some data service as a class with an empty constructor function. As we can see, the service is as bare bones as it can get. Let's add a method to our service so that we can then use it elsewhere in the app. Right under the constructor, I'll write this code. Some method from service, and I'll return 42. Let's save all. And now let's go back to the app components class file and import some service class on line 2. So I'll do import some data service from some data.service. Now we need to access our service data. This is done by simply passing a private argument to the constructor function inside the exported app component class. So I'll save private data some data service. Now that we have the data from some data service available, we can use it anywhere inside our app component class. For example, inside the random values method, we can pass it to the this.thickness value. So instead of having this, we can do this.thickness equals this.data dot some method from service, and we'll just invoke this method. What effect will this have on our app? Of course, the this.thickness data now comes from the some method from service method, a function that lives inside our some data service class. And since this value is set to 42, the border of the table element will no longer change. TypeScript, well, it uses types, so we should add types wherever we can, and some method from service is not specified to return any type. So now let's specify that the return type of this method is number. Although it doesn't throw errors, it's still a nice touch to start using types in TypeScript with Angular, and we might as well start doing it in this video. But don't worry, we're not going to go overboard with this. It's just a slight slow and simple introduction to types with TypeScript in Angular. Alright, so services are used to communicate with some data source. In this example, we've hard-coded some values inside the SomeDataService class itself. However, a real-world scenario includes getting the actual data from an API. Angular comes with its own HTTP library called HTTP Client. We can use HTTP Client to have some data provided from a server. So let's now learn how to work with HTTP Client. To get started, we just need to import it from @Angular common HTTP as an HTTP client module, and then list it inside the @ng module decorator in the imports array of the @module ts file. So let's locate the @module ts, or, well, I might as well just do this, Control P, and then I'll just type app.module and select the first result that comes up. Alright, so I'm going to import HTTP client module. So let's do import HTTP client module from @Angular /common /HTTP. And now in the ng module decorator, I'm just going to say that it imports another module right here, and that module is HTTP client module. Perfect. Now we need to import the HTTP client to the SomeDataService TS file. So let's first save all here, go to the SomeDataService file, and let's import it right here. So I'm going to say import HTTP client from @Angular common HTTP. And inside the constructor of the SomeDataService, I'm going to say private HTTP client. And now I need to use a RESTful API. Well, since we need to get some numbers from an API, we'll use the api.mathjs.org as my free-to-access API. So let's have a look at it briefly. It's just a web service, a RESTful API. Alright, so specifically what I want to do is send a GET request to this URL. So it's api.mathjs.org/v4/ and then I've got a query of expression equals 42. So I want to pass this in to my sum method from service and replace the hard-coded 42 value. So how I'm going to do that? Well, I'm going to do this. This.http.get, and then I'm going to pass this URL inside a pair of parentheses. Let's save it and see what happens. Go back to my app, and it says type observable object is not assignable to type number. So here's an example where error messages in Angular actually guide us to the solution. So let's see how this plays out. First, when we update the sum methods from service, as described here, we get this error. Type observable object is not assignable to type number. So let's try to simply change it to observable, right? So that's what we'll be expecting. So let's try to do it. And let's save all, and we're going to get another error. Generic type observable T requires one type argument. All right, so that's what we need to do. We need to specify the actual returns type instead of this T right here. In other words, what we need to do is this, observable, and then we need to add in the type, and the expected returned value is an object. Let's save it again. but now all our errors are gone, and as far as our sum method from service is concerned, it works. However, we still need to fix another error, and that's this dot thickness, so let's fix it next. To understand what's happening with this error, let's take a step back and stop our Angular server. To understand what's happening with this error, let's take a step back and stop our Angular server. Now let's reopen it with NGS. So since our app is still failing, that means that it might be that we got the wrong URL, but I've already made sure that this is correct, and this one is correct right here too. So the only obvious answer to this issue is that we are not doing something right. And the thing that we still need to do that we haven't discussed before in this video series is subscribing to our Some Data service from App Component TS. So basically, to consume a service in our App Component TS, we must subscribe to it. This is a broad subject, and let's not get too technical here. Instead, we'll just make it work. Let's open App Component TS and locate the random values method, and we'll update it as follows. This.data sum method from service dot subscribe, and we are subscribing to the result, and we'll just console log the result. So let's file save all and see what happens now. Type subscription is not assignable to type number. Alright, so what's going on here is that we are not defining the type of thickness. So let's define it as any. File save all again, and now it should work. So what I did here is I said that the thickness can be of any type, and this makes it less error prone, so to say, or it doesn't throw as many errors as you might expect, but at the same time, it's not, I would say, the Angular way of doing things. But at least we got our app to work, so that's good. And since this video is getting a bit longer, let's leave it at this. And in the next video, we'll be defining our data model.